Hey everybody, John Pollock here alongside Cody Saftik as we are going to go into some news items, including our favorite topic this week, Cody, the New York State Athletic Commission, who has come out and very quickly established themselves as maybe the most hardline commission in the U.S. And I kind of have mixed feelings about this because we look at other commissions where maybe it's too lax and they're not enforcing. It's the complete opposite here, and the latest person to feel the brunt of this is Yoel Romero, who has received a 60-day suspension for hopping the cage after his win over Chris Weidman and then celebrating. So very much becoming the no fun commission is that of New York. Is this a justifiable suspension? Is this something that if you're Yoel Romero's team, you are not even thinking, you are absolutely appealing this?
I think you're gonna appeal it for sure, especially being that 60 days is a long time, especially if they want to throw you in the mix. I know that the fight with Bisping wouldn't happen later in the year, and that's what he's hoping for, but to take 60 days away from an athlete who needs to compete, obviously, to get paid, that's a big thing. With New York, I mean, no one should be surprised that they're the toughest commission. They were the toughest state to physically get MMA legalized in, and even in boxing, it's the same way. But I really want to know, did the fighters know going in that this was going to be in there? Did they know if they miss weight, they get a suspension?
I think that's a great question because when I was at the early weigh-ins on the day prior, on the Friday, I mean, I can tell you, there were so many questions going on about what was happening. Donald Cerrone clearly was not aware of the sliding scale of weights because he wouldn't have been there right at the start to weigh in if he knew his opponent was having a problem and he, much like Jim Miller, would have to gain weight in order to have his fight saved. I mean, that lack of knowledge there could have cost Cerrone, it did cost him potentially his entire win bonus as a result of losing that fight with Gastelum. Now with Romero, it would not surprise me at all, Cody, that none of them were aware of this rule. Hopping the cage is not something foreign in mixed martial arts. It's seen very regularly. And the fact is, 2 months is not something that's going to prevent a guy from fighting. Same with Thiago Alves, 3 months. It's not going to keep him out of a fight. Gastelum 6, that's significant. It's also fines that are attached to some of these as well. I think that's where it hits them, and is this really fair? Is this something that needs to be enforced? Hopping the cage, for instance.
Well, hopping the cage is something that they always tell you, don't hop the cage, don't leave after a fight. So on one hand, you think that the UFC is going to enforce something and be like, slap you on the wrist and give you a fine of their own, but for an athletic commission to then come in and say, you need to sit out half of a year. Now for Kelvin Gastelum, he's young, but imagine Kelvin Gastelum was an aging fighter, someone was in a position where he was going to have a big fight coming up. 6 months is a huge point. And actually, speaking with Tyler Warman, he had a great point. Let's say you miss weight and you lose the fight, right? And you take the suspension. Now you go back to the regional scene. To tell a regional scene fighter that you can't fight for 6 months or 3 months, that's huge because now you're taking away their livelihood, no ways of working their way back to the UFC. And oftentimes, if you miss weight and then you lose, you are going to get released, so it's not a plausible, crazy situation. I think that there needs to be regulation right across the board because, as you said, some commissions now are too lax. Brazil, if you get a no contest due to a positive test, it's not a no contest. You get disqualified. A perfect example of that would be Abel Trujillo against Gleison Tibau. Gleison Tibau dominates him, submits him. That's a win on Abel Trujillo's record. So that changes grossly from the United States where you're getting a no contest, which differs grossly from any other commission. In California, you can get a 2-year suspension, a 3-year suspension. Other commissions, you might get 3 to 6 months. So it'd be nice to see all the commissions on the same page. But for someone like Yoel Romero, I mean, I would assume the appeal is 100%. Like, how could you let this happen, right?
And I've reached out to Romero's management. They haven't responded to us yet if they're planning to appeal this. I mean, I think just as we're discussing this, your head is spinning listening to this.
Absolutely.
So imagine, like, the whole point of, like, the Association of Boxing Commissions was to have uniformity, that you didn't have to think, well, I'm in this state so I can do this, but this state, this is not allowed. And that's the biggest problem here, is that there's no consistency here. If we are truly going to say there is no hopping the cage and it is enforceable, then it should be every single commission is aware of this and you're going to have the same penalties. That is not going to exist where there's a 2-month suspension here and there's at most a verbal warning in another state. And that goes to many different rules, and it ties in with Yoel Romero because how much criticism did that guy get for grabbing the fence against Jacare? Fence grabbing is not allowed, but when is that truly enforced? And maybe you do need a hard-line stance against some of these things if you truly want to get them out of the sport. If you go into a fight, Cody, and you know you're getting minimum 1 warning for a cage grab, then why are you not going to grab the fence when you have an explosive takedown that you're trying to defend, and you know that at most I'm getting a verbal warning here? Whereas in another commission, they may deduct a point from you. You just don't know.
Well, I also know that I could hang it on the stool between rounds for an extra 30 seconds and dump a bottle of water on myself.
I will say, Yoel Romero and his team, I think they know the rule book pretty in and out, so he may have been aware of this hopping the cage. But nonetheless, I think that this is something that it comes completely out of left field for a guy. It's 2 months. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to cost him his fight with Michael Bisping whenever it occurs. But it's still a suspension, and it's still one that you can't necessarily justify to me. If you're looking at just the precedence behind it and how many guys do this on a regular basis.
Well, the missing weight thing is the same thing. I mean, yes, they're professionals, but there's always somebody that misses weight. And you and I were discussing before we came out here, Jim Miller, technically speaking, Jim Miller also missed weight. I mean, he had to put on the weight in order to make the Thiago Alves fight possible. So what if they would have came to him and said, well, you're actually contractually obligated to take it at 55. This catchweight thing got moved late, but you missed weight. If they slap a guy like that with 90 days, that's huge.
If we're following the letter of the law,
yeah,
Jim Miller had to miss weight to keep the fight, which if you're stating that becomes a new catchweight fight, Thiago Alves was then technically within the range. There's a lot of weird. If I was a lawyer, I'd be all over this because you can argue a lot of technicalities here if we're going to get into the weeds about many of these suspensions.
Technically speaking, Yoel Romero left the octagon, but he never left the platform. You see a lot of guys jump into the crowd, John, so I don't know anything about that. I mean, I think that was part of the regulation.
All
That's
right,
what I'm
Yoel
arguing.
Romero, call up Cody Saftik. He'll represent you for free. Better call Cody. That's all for us. We will chat with you later.